And how long did that project run, the pilot? I mean, was it just a matter of weeks or months or?
So we did it over the course of a few months. There were, kind of different pilots at different times. So I'm kind of lumping these all together in my head. But, our growth team, they might have spent 2 or 3 months looking at it in a product organization before we hopped on board with Snowflake. We like to do our own thorough testing to make sure that, we kind of understand the technology and that it's going to work well for our use case and be cost effective. And that method for us took about 4 months. But all in all, it was relatively fast to get up and running. There was just a lot of validation we wanted to do.
Yeah, because the cloud, you're able to get into the application immediately.
Right.
That sounds great. A couple months and you have results.
Mm-hmm.
I know you have masses of data that you collect on behalf of each of your individual clients, and you share it with them. But you take some data that you share with all of them that kind of cuts across the industry that they can learn from. Talk about that a little bit.
So essentially, when we look at what is kind of really exciting about Braze from an industry standpoint, is that we work with a tremendous number of different industries, whether that's media, as I was just talking about, with retail customers, with gaming, with lifestyle, with on-demand. And really what is on a lot of folks' minds when they're looking at their engagement programs is they're wondering like how they're stacking up against their peers or their competitors. And what has been a really great service that we've provided to our customers is able to give them those kind of industry benchmarks around how they're doing. Just make sure there's no reason to kind of look at your engagement blind and see if your open rate is good or bad. If you don't have anything to compare it against, it's very hard for you to iterate and optimize and kind of know where you are. And so what we've always provided our own customers, their benchmarks from what we see. So if we're working with a retail company, we can say, hey, here's your email open rate. Here's what we're seeing across the retail space. And we can tell them, maybe you're ahead of the curve, or here's some areas in which you can improve on because we can compare it to a benchmark. And we wanted to make that something that anyone could take advantage of, not just Braze customers. So what we did is we took kind of an anonymous aggregated data set across the mobile, web, and email engagement data from more than 600 of our brands that are in the EU and the US. And we looked at things like monthly and quarterly and yearly engagement rates by industry. And we essentially took millions of campaigns across more than a dozen industries to look at, again, like things like email open rates, push notification clicks, email click rates, and all of those kinds of ratios. And then we created our own data set called the Braze benchmarks. And this is a data set that is freely accessible to anyone who has a Snowflake account, where they can just pull this data directly from us. But what I think is really novel about this is that this data is essentially served directly from Braze's instance. Like, we're not copying the data and dumping it over to Snowflake. Our data exists in Snowflake already, and it's updating continuously. So we send tens of billions of messages every single month. And as we are sending those messages, this benchmark data is essentially being continuously updated. And so you can kind of get access to this benchmark data just right directly in your Snowflake account. And what that means then is you can then put it in your own BI tools. And even if you're not a Braze customer, you can see how you compare in the industry. And if you think about how you would get benchmark data today, you would probably basically just Google for, email open rates by industry. At best, you find, maybe a PDF from last quarter or last year's open rates. And it's very hard to really kind of respond or interact with that yourself. But this is extremely interactive. You have access to the raw data, and it's constantly updated. I think it's really one of the kind of game changers for folks who are in marketing to be able to see how they stack up.
That's a great service you're doing for your industry, and I'm sure they appreciate it. Hey, it's a funny thing. It's a personal story, but I'm recently switching from one email system to another, and it really has made me think a lot about email marketing, email advertising, because I kind of have to see how Hotmail did it and now how Gmail does it. And, you have an incredibly challenging job, and your clients have a challenging job to take something that for many people who use the internet and use their computers could be a nuisance. We got spam. They're unwelcome approaches all the time. So you have to take what might be normally seen as an unwelcome approach or a nuisance and turn it into a welcome interaction. It's almost magical in my view. I mean, if you can get to the essence, and maybe we've already talked about some of the big concepts here, but what's the essence of turning something from a nuisance into a welcoming experience?
Sure. So one thing I'll just kind of preface this on with is when done well, personalization is something that is a huge benefit to the consumers. I mean, I think that if you just look across our digital lives, we really have very high expectations around the amounts of personalization that we get from anything, whether we're online shopping or we are watching Netflix or something where we're consuming any kind of media, to or listening to music. I think that you see that brands that do this really well create this self-reinforcing loop that affects all industries and really raises the bar for everyone to deliver a great personalized experience to this point where it's not a nuisance if it's personal. What's bothersome is when you get a message that is completely not personalized for you. When you get a message from your credit card company reminding you to download the mobile app to pay your bills, when in fact you've been using the mobile app to pay your statement off every month for the last year. And you see those kinds of bad experiences happen from brands that are siloed. If they have an email team that is separate from their web team, that's separate from their mobile app team, and they're all using different data sets and using different strategies. And so the things I would say is that if you want to turn this into something successful, there's a couple of different things, but they really, the pattern relies on having great data and focusing on that, thinking about how your teams operate and your technology. So, I mean, I would kind of say the takeaway points for me would be just really kind of like focus on your customers and integrate multiple different data sources. Really try to understand what are your customers essentially doing. You want to think about like what happened, like what do they use what do they do with my product? And that's kind of a backward-looking question with your data, but essentially you want to understand why did a consumer take a certain action, so that you can ultimately kind of mature your own kind of thoughts on this to be able to predict what your consumers want and how you can help make something happen for your customers. And so being focused on your customer and integrating multiple data sources there is a huge benefit. I'll also say then teams are very important. Is investing in talent is super critical, and we have now a lot of different folks that play a part of the engagement strategy. It's not just the marketing team. I mean, consumers don't really care if it's the marketing team or the email team or the product team that is sending them an email. They don't even know. Ultimately, they're just having an experience. So you need kind of best in class folks, data science, engineering, product, marketing, really to kind of be productive here. And also then like empower them to be independent and to make good technology decisions. So then leads me to my last bit, which is that you need to now build on a modern architecture and essentially have something that is able to interact with your clients and respond to what they're doing in real time. And that's where having a solution like Braze is extremely important. It's where something like Snowflake is very important because it allows you to be very nimble, to have all your data, to share it across your whole organization, and really, as I mentioned, like have a very fast time to insight.
Yeah, no, I think those are really good points. Jon, we've had a really good discussion of, how your technology works, how your industry works, how to make email and all kinds of digital marketing better. But the context for our conversation today is really in the middle of this phenomenal coronavirus pandemic that is really causing chaos in society and the economy and in businesses. So I wanted to check in with you. What is the immediate impact of the pandemic on your clients and on your business?
Sure. So as you know, Steve, I mean, really all industries have been affected by the coronavirus pandemic, and some of them have been affected more than others. And what we do at Braze is that we provide our customers with the ability to communicate with their consumers. And this is more important now than ever. We've been fortunate and have been able to prepare for these types of scenarios. We're very diversified and across our clients. We work with over 800 customers from over 50 countries across multiple industries. As you can imagine, though, some of our customers have been greatly affected by the coronavirus. We've seen some of them where there's been increased usage from things like the work from home that's been driving more kind of traffic to them. But it's really kind of been a mix.
So, during this crisis, obviously there's lots of pain, there's lots of concern, and brands have to be very careful about how they present themselves. But they also have this great opportunity, if they take it, to really reach out to people and to help them get through it. And I think you've had a couple of examples of clients of yours that have really used their marketing tools, their advertising tools to really engage with people in new and very positive ways. So if you could talk about one of those, that'd be great.
Sure. One thing that's become a little more clear is how important it is for brands to communicate directly with their customers. This was already a trend that we had been seeing, but it's really accelerated now with kind of the current situation. And there are some businesses that I see that don't do this super well. I mean, there's a fast food chain that has been sending me the same push notification every day at the exact same time for me to come on by and purchase an item from them. And they're not really kind of innovating or testing or doing anything different with their messaging. But then we have a customer of ours who is also in the fast food industry, and they've been doing something which I think has really shown their human side and shown that they understand, kind of what's going on, and they want to be helpful and friendly. And one of the things that they've been doing is they've kind of been playing on top of the fact that you have so many students who are at home doing remote learning, and there's a lot of focus on education and teaching. And they've been creating campaigns that are all around quizzes and trivia for different subjects. So they'll send you a push notification one day that has a math problem on it. And the push notification says, are you good at math? If so, click here and solve a puzzle and get a free item. Something like that. That's not the exact quote, but you click on the push notification, then you get served in that message that Braze is serving to you that has, really fun branded kind of look on the math question. And then it has a problem for you to solve. And if you solve it, then there's a box to put in a coupon code. And if you get it right and put it in there, then you get a free item. And they've been doing this with a couple of different subjects. There's been math, there's been geography, computer science. And I think that's just something where they're really trying to connect with their consumers because they know that folks are at home. They're having to teach their kids. Maybe they can teach their kids some math and also get a free item from, a really great fast food restaurant at the same time. And so I think that's been a great example that I've seen come out of this that highlights the creativity and the ingenuity of people, even in this trying time.
Yeah, that is a great example. Just the idea that the kids are kind of trapped at home. Maybe school isn't as much fun there, and they're making education fun and kind of bridging the gap. That's really cool. And I think that at a time of great stress, at a time of crisis, leaders of government, of industry, business leaders, brands, the ones that step up and show kind of a sensitivity to the situation and a authenticity, that really does create a lasting impression. I mean, I think it's, in a way, it's opportunistic, but it's also just a smart way of dealing. And I think we do see some of the brands doing that. The last question I wanted to ask you is, this crisis will end. Nobody knows when and how, but we know it'll end. So I want you to look ahead for a few years beyond this, the big picture. How do you see data and these new uses of data changing your industry and even changing business in general?
Earlier in our conversation, I mentioned that we see a trend that businesses want to have access to their raw data and that they don't want it to be siloed in their SaaS providers. And so one of the things that I think we're going to see is that trend will continue, and you will have an increase in data interoperability. And I think that it's not just business demand that is going to drive that, but also the consumer demand that's driven by regulations like GDPR. For example, under GDPR for data privacy, you essentially have rules say that data controllers have to guarantee that any personal data they have is transmitted in like a structured, commonly used format and can be interoperable. And I think that you're going to see more of that kind of definitions on data take place. I think Snowflake's going to be an interesting spot in this because with data sharing, essentially allow brands to be able to unlock the data that they have in their own data warehouses and share that with clients and share it in a format that is easily accessible and digestible. And I think you'll start to see a larger ecosystem be built out on top of data warehouses and products like Snowflake, where you're going to kind of be able to extend and expand upon SaaS businesses by using their data for other additional things. So I really see that trend of kind of data openness, spawning new businesses and new use cases, and also then being ultimately, again, a boon for businesses, which ultimately ends up being a boon for consumers.
It's like a big data mashup in the sky. Mm-hmm. So that's a very positive outlook. I like to end on a positive note because we did explore the coronavirus pandemic a bit, and that's clearly a very serious and somber matter. But Jon, I want to thank you for your time today. I think you've really brought a lot of insight to this that maybe people hadn't thought about before or weren't aware of before. And I think you're really in the middle of this, data marketing and data communications, which is so essential, especially today. So I want to thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Steve. Talk soon.
That does it for this episode of Rise of the Data Cloud. Thank you for listening. This episode is brought to you by Snowflake. To see how you can get secure and easy access to any data with near infinite scalability, visit snowflake.com.